Hi everyone, it's yvetteleblowitz from SPAITGIRL.com and welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Erica Hornthal, who is a licensed clinical professional counsellor and board certified dance and movement therapist, aka the therapist who moves you. We're talking to Erica today about her brand new book, Body Aware. Rediscover your mind-body connection, stop feeling stuck, and improve your mental health with simple movement practices. So we're going to be talking to Erica today about how we can move and what movement actually means and how our movement impacts our mental health and emotional health. And when we change the way we move, we change the way we live. Erica, welcome to the podcast show. How are you today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
I can't wait to have this conversation with you and to share it with our incredible global audience who are all listening in. I hope you're all well, and I'm so grateful you're here with Erica and I today. So, Erica, before we dive into your book, are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, you gave me a beautiful introduction. I am a dance movement therapist. I live in Chicago, so I practice as a clinical professional counselor in the state of Illinois in the United States. I have 2 kids. I have 2 dogs. I'm married. I love to dance, and my guilty pleasure is shopping.
And when did your love for dance or dance, depending what part of the world you're in, come about?
Well, probably before I can remember. I started dancing when I was about 3. I have very choppy memories about what that means and what that looked like. Mostly, just stories that have been told. But I know I started dancing from a pretty young age, and I was doing jazz and ballet, and that became jazz and tap. It's really what I write about with regard to dance is honestly what kept me moving, particularly through challenging times in my life, which for me were things like just growing up. I moved around quite a bit with my family, and it's what allowed me to make social connections. It's what allowed me to have a community. It's also what kept me just grounded and moving when I was not very grounded and quite transparently freaking out and very overwhelmed and struggling mentally. And then it just kind of went from there. In high school, I was fortunate enough to be a part of our dance company at school. There was cheerleading. There was something they called POMs, but then there was also a dance department. And so it was very much influenced by modern dance. That was really when I was introduced to a lot of modern dance. And then I went off to college and did a lot of dancing in college and taught dance very briefly, performed very briefly, and ultimately found my way to the field of dance movement therapy.
Wow, that's incredible. So started at a very young age. And what is dance movement therapy?
Well, here in the United States, we have the American Dance Therapy Association. In Australia, there's the Dance Therapy Association of Australasia. And according to them, it's the psychotherapeutic use of movement to integrate social, cognitive, physical, emotional, and even spiritual faculties of a person, facets of an individual. For me, I really try to define dance movement therapy as a psychotherapy that uses movement to observe, to assess, and also to intervene in a therapeutic capacity or within the therapeutic relationship. And it's really about bringing in all of the nonverbal communication that's happening as we're trying to release or explore or uncover what we're dealing with, life struggles, circumstances, trauma, etc.
And when you're doing the dance therapy, are you following an instructor as such, or are you just moving your body in such a way that feels organic and natural to you, listening into the body?
Definitely the latter. It's not a prescriptive movement. It's not exercise. Most of the time, if you were to walk by a session, it might not even look like dance. It can just be 2 people sitting down, being aware of what's happening in the body as we either struggle to talk about what we're going through or just can't find the words to express what we're going through. Oftentimes in therapy, we run out of things to say. I had a session not that long ago. Client just needed to kind of be, just be in the room in a safe container, witnessed by someone who was able to just see them for who they are and who they wanted to be recognized as. And that doesn't take a lot of movement. It's just the witnessing. It's also the permission giving to just exist in this moment in time, in this body, without judgment from the mind. I don't take that lightly, but I get that for a lot of people, that doesn't appear to be dance.
How could someone become body aware?
Well, body aware to me is using the body, the sensations, the feelings. I like to use the word or the term felt bodily sensations to gain a new perspective in our mind. So using the body, what we're feeling, to then have new awareness around why we do what we do, why we're feeling the way we're feeling, why we behave or react the way that we do. So it can be something more involved, like a movement intervention or mindful guided meditation, or it can really just be as simple as inviting in and even noticing movement that's already happening or the lack thereof.
And most recently, I did, as an example, a yin yoga class and literally just had to lay in a pose, breathing, and just actually noticing the body. Now, this isn't the most comfortable thing, depending on what pose. What I did notice was that emotions came up, or thoughts from like 13 years ago that I've forgotten all about, and it might have been sitting in my hip. In your book, you talk about your issues reside in your tissues.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit about emotions and that storing in the body?
Research has shown that there are actually molecules, thanks to Dr. Candace Pert, who discovered these receptors in the body. We now know that molecules of emotion exist throughout the body and not just in the brain. We know things like fascia, connective tissue, right? Hold a lot of these emotions, store a lot of the sensations and the feelings, and therefore, again, the emotions that we associate with certain past occurrences, certain situations, right, or circumstances that we've lived through. And the thing is, we don't always move these parts of our body. They can be stagnant for a very long time. We get very comfortable with similar or familiar movements, and so we just always move in the same way. I like to say that worry and anxiety thrive in stillness. And while stillness is very important because it allows us to become more present to what we're feeling in the moment, it can be very overwhelming. And so we practice doing a lot. We just keep ourselves busy. We're always moving from one thing to the next. And if we allow ourselves to just be still and quiet, that itself can be very overwhelming. There is movement in stillness because there's lots of movement still happening within the body. But our mind starts to go crazy because it has downtime and it's starting to feel things and it doesn't know what to do about it. So it's really discovering this connection, right, between the mind and the body, and actually allowing ourselves to figure out or harness the power of the body to help connect and calm the mind, or just meet the mind where it is. And again, this interaction between the two, this mind-body connection, which we all have, we just aren't always tapped into.
And when we pay attention to the body sensations and what's going on, then we can process or heal either past traumas. Does that then make way for feeling a little bit lighter?
It can. I think what people need to know is that you may feel heavier in a sense, physically, emotionally. It's really about practicing leaning into what we're experiencing, because so often we escape from it, run from it, or we freeze, these classic fight, flight, or freeze responses. When I talk about going into the body or bringing the body online, it's really as simple as just recognizing how my movement, how my body is showing up in relation to what I'm thinking. And that it's usually the body that's feeling it much longer than the mind has been thinking of it, but we're not aware of how that's showing up until it becomes this endless thought cycle. So bringing the body online isn't necessarily a certain regimen. It's really just about starting to pay attention and being aware of where my body is in space, what parts of my body I'm feeling, what parts of my body am I neglecting, and that when I open myself up to feeling some of these parts, it may feel really overwhelming at first, and that's okay. And we just need to go slow. We need to be compassionate. And sometimes we need guidance. Sometimes we need somebody to help facilitate this. So Body Aware was an in. It was a way for people to have access to this information and tools if they don't have access to, say, a dance therapist or a somatic practitioner. But it's not meant to be the only thing out there. It's a gateway, if you will.
And in your book, you share 30 movement prompts to get out of your head and into your body. Could you just share a couple with our listeners?
The point of the movement prompts was just to remind people that there are movements that you could be doing that we used to do as children. We didn't even realize we were doing it until our parents were like, stop that now. So things like jumping jacks, wiggling your fingers, shaking your body, twisting. I think I even put flossing in there.
You did.
It was just like direction. I was probably doing it with my daughter. So I was like, oh yeah, let's floss. Some of it's very simplistic, very pedestrian, and some of it's more dance oriented. But it was also meant to kind of get people out of their dance judgment bubble or movement judgment bubble and thinking like 30 ways to be mindfully moving. No. It's just 30 ways to move at all. So if you're feeling like a lack of movement, you could take one of those. You could take 5 of those. You could string them together and create your own little movement ritual or movement meditation. My intention wasn't for you to do all 30 in a row, but just to give a sampler and then get the juices flowing. How else can I move? Maybe movement for me is I'm brushing my teeth. I'm taking a breath. I'm walking the dog. Like those are all movement prompts as well. It was just, again, a gateway, a place to start so that people start remembering what movement is and how possible it can be.
That is so good. So if you're feeling stressed, you could literally be focusing in on wiggling your fingers. You'll have to go to the YouTube channel so you can see Erica and I doing this. Just make a good TikTok. We're wiggling our fingers. Could take your mind off the rising cost of gas or petrol.
Shaking, we know from research like Peter Levine or even things from polyvagal theory suggest when we're experiencing stress, one of the best things we can do is to just shake it off, release some of that tension that's built up in the body and that energy that becomes so stagnant. If you notice that your nerves have calmed or you're feeling a little bit more focused, there's a reason for it.
I love that. Would you recommend people explore movement? Because you mentioned earlier in the podcast show, we tend to do the same movement. So do you feel being curious about movement is also good for body awareness?
Absolutely. I actually talk about curiosity a little bit in the book too. I give some directives or some ideas with regard to movement. I like to say that it's not just how you move, it's the execution of the movement. Ideally, it's about mindfully doing the movement, not just going through the motions. Sometimes it can be a certain movement, and other times it is really just about authentically connecting to a certain part of the body and letting that part of the body move however it wants. There are times when certain movements, exercises will be beneficial to reach a certain goal. But anytime that we can bring in new and unfamiliar ways of moving, again, in a safe manner, right? Because everybody has different abilities and different limitations. The more we can bring in these new and unfamiliar movements, we can actually help build our resilience. We can help increase our window of tolerance to stressors, and we can assist with just simple regulation of our nervous system.
What inspired you to want to dedicate Chapter 9 to disability and diversity?
We're in a period of time where we're really being more inclusive, really trying to see things from others' perspectives and bring more people to the table. I realize when we hear the word diversity, it conjures up different things for different people. Sometimes it has more of a cultural focus. Sometimes it's more of race or ethnicity. Movement, oftentimes it's bringing up ideas of able-bodied or disabled individuals. For me, actually, my thought immediately went to cognitive differences because I was so used to working with older adults that had some form of dementia. I think at the heart of it, when I just sat down and really thought about movement, even though we all move in different ways, and we may have certain, again, differences or limitations, we all have whatever entity you believe in. But I like to say, we have a God-given right to move. And really what comes in is the mind judging movement. Oh, that's not how you're supposed to move. Or, oh, she can't move. instead of just going into the body and just recognizing whatever movement is present. I had so many staff members and medical professionals and therapists that would come into my groups in nursing homes and just see what wasn't possible, instead of, when I came in, just noticing what was. It's like, well, we just start moving and you didn't think they could, or gosh, they're standing up and they haven't done that in years. So it just felt like this big theme. One way to kind of just unify all of us is that we all move. I mean, that is life. And so, not to get too existential or dilute the social justice causes, right, that are out there, but it's like when we can just come together and realize that we all have the ability to move, it felt like a way to really tap into this tapestry of humankind, and something that can actually bring us together. And furthermore, like kind of talking about how it can support our world if we're just living more embodied lives. We're more empathic to the people and the places around us.
I love that, because I spend a lot of time in aged care and I see a lot of people who are in a wheelchair, but they've still got their hand movement and they have the Zumba classes there and they're able to participate with the movements, or they have activities. So beautiful. I thought that you included that, because a lot of books, when it comes to movement or exercise, don't. When it comes to our emotions, there are so many ways that we can distract ourselves from our emotions. But if someone's listening in and their technique has been just to distract from their emotions, what would you suggest to them as a little starting point to check in and notice their emotions?
Honestly, I think the first step is really just noticing the body, period. So rather than jumping into the deep end and making the connection between movement and emotion, because that can be really overwhelming, you can just start to bring attention to what you notice about how your body is showing up in this moment. I'm sitting in a chair, my right leg is crossed over my left, my arms are resting in my lap, my breath is somewhat held, but now that I'm noticing it, I'm going to breathe a little bit deeper. Really noticing the posturing of the body, the gesturing of the body, without having to immediately center it around emotion, or connect it to emotion, because we might not be used to acknowledging or even noticing what our body is doing. And so that's a big step in itself. So I think just bringing attention to how your body is showing up in this moment, what postures and gestures it's taking on. Once that becomes a little bit more familiar or even accessible, then you can kind of ask the question of, how do I know that I'm feeling this way? I'm feeling really nervous right now. If I couldn't use that word or I couldn't express that through verbal language, what in my body suggests nerves or nervousness? And then we have access because we're used to checking in with different parts. So I might say, oh, look, my leg is crossed over my other leg and my toe is shaking. My lower extremities are wiggling. Is that anxiety? Are those my nerves? So that, again, it's not just an internal sensation, because that can be a little overwhelming, but we're noticing the external movement. My fingers are shaking or my eyes twitching, just like these things that are happening in the body that we can witness with our own eyes. Then if that's starting to feel accessible, that's when you can kind of do the opposite. You can say, what do I feel in my body? And does that translate to a certain emotion, right? Like, I'm feeling kind of this fluttering in my chest. What do I know that to be? Am I excited? Am I joyful? Maybe I'm anxious because something is going to happen, or I'm anticipating something's going to happen. So it's a process. It doesn't have to just be, I don't do it, now I do it. There's gentle steps to get there. So just for those listening, we can first just notice posture and gesture of the body. We can then notice with our own eyes external movements that are happening in the body. And then we can actually go in and start to sense what we feel from the inside out.
I love those tips, because even thinking about noticing where your feet are positioned, if they're crossed, even how your shoulders are, what's going on in your face, is your jaw clenched, and then noticing your breathing pattern or your breath. all of this is going on, but sometimes we're just not aware. So the body awareness can be a simple practice to become aware. And when it comes to your own self-care rituals and movement, what does that look like for you?
Try to practice what I preach. I mean, dance is a big one for me. It helps my juices flow. It helps me be creative. It helps me express and just kind of move through things when I'm feeling really heavy, confined, and tight, which is how, my body kind of takes on stress. I definitely try to practice moving in different ways, moving in new ways. I walk a different route. I drive different routes regularly. If I can get to the same place, but I can drive in different ways and not necessarily detour hours. But if it's a few minute difference, then I'll do it. I definitely like to challenge myself by doing things with my non-dominant hand, which I talk about a lot in the book. And I love my family, and they're very supportive, and that in itself is self-care. But for me, self-care oftentimes is being with myself, is really checking in with myself. I'm an only child, and I think that was a coping strategy growing up. And while it has its ups and downs, it's very much allowed me to stay connected to myself. I wouldn't say I was always body aware as a kid, but I was certainly always aware of something in my mind. And I've had a lot of time to just be with myself. I'm in my own therapy. I go to my own therapist. And a lot of self-care for me is actually spending quality time with myself.
That's so amazing. When it comes to your movement, then you're doing different routes. I only did that the other week where I was doing the same walk, and I've done it for months, and I'm like, I don't feel like walking. This is boring. I got to the boring stage, and then I'm like, I know what I need to do. Change my walk and mix it up.
I myself try to engage in exercise at least 30 minutes a day. Sometimes that's dance. I love to do Zumba. I love Pilates, more so than yoga. But, I think there's this understanding that there's physical exercise, but that alone is not enough for our mental health. That's the real piece, is like if we're looking to improve our mental health, exercise alone is not going to do it. And sometimes it actually perpetuates the poor mental health that we have, and that we really need to look at all of the ways we could be moving, or all of the ways that we're not moving, to start to build a more robust movement vocabulary, because that's what helps us manage daily stressors. That's what helps us increase that window of tolerance. That's what helps our entire system be more resilient. And if we're just continuing to move in the same ways that are familiar, even if they are fun and make us feel good, we're still doing ourselves a disservice, and we're still going to end up losing a lot of our potential just because we're not experiencing it through the body.
And it's interesting you say that, because I've had to introduce the yin yoga to go deeper into the tissues or the cells of the body to figure out what's going on. I think it's a really great practice for healing. Why is it we store a lot in our hips?
There's a connection, an embodied connection, really, between the jaw and the pelvis and the hips. There's connective tissue that connects both. And we tend to carry a lot of tension in our jaw. And so it migrates very easily to the hips. I will use that awareness a lot in our sessions, because either I'll notice that the hips are very tight, and so that might be the in, or we notice, my jaw's really killing me, and we can start to alleviate some of the tension by moving our hips. I think it's also about engaging in different ends of the spectrum when it comes to movement. Am I always doing a certain intensity when it comes to movement? Do I shy away from things that are slow and stagnant or sustained? Because that's very telling. If I have to move with a certain intensity or a certain speed, and that slowing down for me is really difficult. So again, we don't necessarily need to jump into a 60-minute Tai Chi class if we're used to only doing higher interval training, but it's certainly worth exploring bits and pieces of it so that we start to build, again, this idea of like a robust movement profile, so that I can switch from speed, slow to fast. I can go big and I can go small. I can do quick, small steps, or I can do long, sustained steps. And I think a way to make it understandable is I have yet to meet someone that's inflexible in their mind, but flexible in their body. And when I say flexible in the body, it's not like necessarily doing splits, but it's just being able to move, being able to adjust, being able to transition quickly. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that an incongruence, if you will. And that if we really want to be someone that's able to take things on, or move through things, not have them attached to us, not take on other people's stuff, so to speak. It really comes down to this ability to move through our body, the ability to move through our space, take up space, shrink when we need to, rather than always showing up in the same way.
I love that. Rather than always showing up in the same way. When it comes to your book, Body Aware, what inspired you to write your book?
I mean, other than people becoming the voice in my head that was like, you should write a book, you should write a book. Do you have a book? You should write a book. Before that, I used to get, do you have DVDs? Do you have a DVD of this? Do you have dance therapy on DVD? I was like, no. At the heart of it, it was realizing that I, through my license, can only practice in one state. And an effort to spread and educate more about dance therapy, reach more people, but also ideally spread some of my own orientation and methodology to a greater audience, I realized that the best way to do that was through written language when possible. There was a workbook. I know a lot of people are doing online courses. That seemed a lot harder for me as opposed to sitting down and writing. I was used to writing articles and blogs and having a lot more experience with that. So while the thought of writing like 60,000 words felt very overwhelming, I just chipped a little bit away at a time. And before I knew it, I had a whole manuscript. It was really the push to get not just visibility for the field of dance therapy, but for me to reach more people, because quite literally, I can only practice as a therapist in my area.
Well, I'm so grateful you wrote your book, because here we are. I'm sitting in Australia. You're sitting in the US. We're chatting about Body Aware, your book. You had a beautiful foreword as well. Such great support there.
The support was beautiful. It was really important to me to have the support from outside of the field of dance movement therapy, because in some way, and I kind of roll my eyes at this, it makes it more legitimate. Dance therapy can stand on its own. I definitely believe in the field. The book is a testament to that. It's been around for over 60 years. I mean, in the westernized sense, obviously dance and healing is old as time. When the opportunity presented itself and I thought about, okay, who would I want to write a foreword? I really tried hard to think of someone outside of the field, someone that understood the need to move the body, the connection between mind and body, the holistic approach to mental health that was not connected to dance movement therapy, that could relay the information in a way that other people would understand it. Oh yeah, wow, I never thought about dance therapy, but now I'm interested. So it was strategic. And I was just so thankful that holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole Pero, was willing to read my manuscript and willing to recommend it and write a foreword. Was just like icing on the cake.
So beautiful, such a beautiful random act of kindness. Because I thought it was good that you had someone who is a holistic psychologist. For her to want to write your foreword and to even take the time to read your book, as busy as she is, I thought was just such a beautiful act of kindness. And it just reminded me of sometimes people might still have a big following, but they genuinely do care about people's health and well-being and mental health.
It's a good reminder that there are people behind those platforms.
Yes.
Like sometimes these big platforms, you reach out or you write a message to, nobody responds, or it's a generic, thank you, we'll get back to you as soon as possible. I actually reached out to Dr. LaPera like on Instagram, and for her to actually respond quite quickly, actually, I was shocked. I was really shocked. Now, her platform has grown immensely since she and I actually first connected. The book wasn't out yet, though. And so like to see all of that unfold and to see her platform continue to grow, it's amazing that there's obviously a large group of people that are interested in not just a holistic approach, but also this kind of self-healing approach to the work. Yeah, never underestimate reaching out to someone. You just never know who's actually going to read it and who's going to respond.
I thought it was such a beautiful random act of kindness and such a reminder that you could really reach out to anyone. Doesn't mean everyone's going to get back to you. You might be a little bit disappointed if they don't, but definitely having the courage to even ask, because you never know. It could be a yes, it could be a no. Trying and asking. You just never know who wants to help you. There's always help out there, I believe, and people who want to improve humanity and the well-being of others. Now, Erica, I love the color of your book, Body Aware. Was that a deliberate color. Everyone go to the Spirit Girl YouTube channel. Your wall is purple. We got the Body Aware poster up. Hold the book up.
I had two options for the cover originally. The other one looked totally different from this. It was white. It was a little bit more academic. So I saw this and I was like, this is definitely the cover. Yeah, I just had a visceral response to it. I loved it. But it was actually more of a navy blue. In some lights, it kind of still looks that way. But if you bring it up close, you can see it's definitely purple. And when I saw the navy blue, I remember reaching out to my editor and I said, this is great. And it needs to be purple. And she was like, I don't think that'll be a problem. I don't know. I'll ask and see if they can do that. And I said, it's not just because I like the color. Yes, it stands out. There aren't many purple books, at least in like the self-help psychology space that I noticed. Purple is associated with the Alzheimer's cause. The Alzheimer's Association's ribbon is purple. And I had been very involved with the Alzheimer's Association. It was a color that stuck in my mind. It's one of my favorite colors. And so I said, like, if we can make this happen, I'd like it to be purple because that's the association I have with it. The book is dedicated to my clients that taught me just because you can't say something doesn't mean there's nothing to be said. It just felt necessary. But yes, as you can tell, I love purple. It's the color of the wall behind me. And it's in a lot of pictures that I have hanging up. It's just very calming. It's regal. I've heard it's very royal color. It's always spoken to me. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and the book cover is so beautiful. How does it feel to have your book out now? Like to be a published author?
It's sitting differently this week than last week. It came out last week in the United States, and I was just like, well, yeah. I mean, they said it was coming out on the 9th, so it's here. It felt very surreal. I mean, it still does, kind of talking about it, but now it's starting to settle in. And having people reach out and say, oh, I read your book or just heard you. I just ordered it. Can't wait to read it. That makes it real. And all of a sudden I start realizing, oh, I did that. I didn't know if I had that in me. I did most of it during COVID. And so really it was a lifeline. It's kind of what kept me connected to the work and to the field when a lot of us were very uncertain about where we'd be practicing and how we'd be practicing and how long we'd be practicing. So it was kind of a labor of love and what felt like a necessity for me to really stay connected and do the work. Now to see it actually doing what I was hoping it would do, helping people. And I think for me, it's like the most exciting kind of shocking thing is actually seeing it in the world. I went into my local bookstore and it was on the shelf. And there wasn't a guarantee of that, but just kind of seeing it was just very like, oh, this happened. Oh, this is happening. You know, it's like so many things are virtual now. You know, anybody can order it online. And the publisher is North Atlantic, but it's distributed by Penguin. And just because it's distributed by Penguin doesn't mean it's going to be everywhere. I mean, it could be, but the bookstore has to order it. And so obviously people are seeing something in it. It's a really important topic and certainly coming up more and more in our society. So I think it was also a little bit about the timing. It feels surreal. It is settling in and starting to feel really exciting.
It's amazing. And I think that people are very interested in the mind-body connection and improving mental health in simple movement practices.
Yeah, I noticed everybody seemed to be jumping on TikTok, is doing these dance challenges and kind of this explosion of dance, whether you were doing it or watching it. And my colleagues and I were like, well, yeah, because people need an outlet. And it looks like entertainment, but it's actually serving a dual purpose because people needed a way to physically express and connect. Like I said, it feels kind of like divine timing. I ended up going with a publisher that had a longer than usual, I would say, publication timeline. And I thought, it's fine by me. Like I needed the time to write, and having it come out now versus 9 months earlier, our world looked very different. Even just being able to be in person, have like a book event where I can actually talk to someone and show them and we can experience these things together. It can be done virtually and it still will be done virtually, but just to have that potential, I really welcome it. And this may be really helpful for your listeners that there is an audiobook. At least in the United States, it comes out the end of August. But for anybody listening that's like, I'm not really a reader, an ebook, there will be an audio. It's nice to know because I think some people need the guidance. They want to hear the movement directive and to have that aid or support in another way. It's really adamant about.
I think audiobooks are incredible, especially when you're traveling, you're driving on the highway for 3 or 4 hours, or even when you're going for a walk. They're very doable. And I know so many people love listening to audiobooks because it's a really convenient way to consume a book. There's so many ways that you can listen to the audiobook and fit it into a busy lifestyle. What is your hope for your Newfound book readers?
My hope is that people begin to understand that they have a lot of the tools that they need for positive mental health already inside of them. And that it's not always something you have to subscribe to. It's not a new regimen or equipment. It literally starts with just becoming more aware of what's already happening inside your body, inside that body-mind connection. And that's not as mainstream knowledge at this point. It's feels like new age, right? To be talking about the wisdom within the body, but it's as old as time. And it just felt like it was time for people to understand that that connection exists, that they have access to it, and to just encourage them to tap into it a little bit more because it will drastically improve your mental health.
That is so amazing. What inspired you to want to become a licensed clinical professional counselor?
To be completely honest, that was the only way that I could actually practice as a dance therapist. Dance therapy in the United States is not nationally recognized. Usually to practice it privately, you need to be recognized as a psychotherapist. And so in the state where I live, in Illinois, you could either be licensed as a counselor, as a social worker, or as a psychologist or a medical doctor. So I wasn't going to med school. I could have gone on to get my PhD. I have yet to do that. The program that I actually went to was dance movement therapy and counseling, so that you got all of the counseling credits you needed. So when you were done with your graduate degree, you could sit for your licensure in your state and then be supervised and work 3,600 hours before you actually become clinically licensed. It's definitely strategic. It was always to become a dance movement therapist. It was just literally the thing that I needed in order to do what I wanted to do.
Well, I love that you've got your book out now, Body Aware, because it allows you to take your dance therapy movement to the world. You can get that message out there. And I think that's what's so beautiful about books and us talking today on the podcast show. Congratulations again, Erica, on your book. And thank you again for sharing your words of wisdom, story, tips, practical insights, and your passion for helping other people become body aware. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful we had this opportunity to spend time with you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yvette. It was lovely.
Thanks for listening into this Spirit Girl podcast episode. I hope you found this conversation of interest and benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Leblowitz Spirit Girl podcast, and to also leave a 5-star rating and a review of what you think too. Share this show with your family, friends, and community. Subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com and yvetteleblowitz.com. Be sure to follow Spirit Girl and Yvette Blowitz on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.